Hello, welcome back to Skeledon, Bushcraft and Survival. I'm Skeledon, and thanks for joining me. Now, I started thinking about things, and I kind of want to go over from start to finish on how to make a bow drill and tips and tricks on how to be successful in creating an actual fire with a bow drill method. So, starting from the very top, let's just go ahead and talk about the bow, because you need 4 parts in a bow drill. And it's the bow, the spindle, the hearthboard, and the socket. Well, we're going to start with the bow. Now the bow, it really doesn't matter what you get for the bow. Any stick that is about that long, okay, I mean it goes way past the hand. And everything that I see starts from the fingertip back. Hey, I want easy sailing. I don't want any struggle. In a survival situation, you want to conserve on energy the best you can. You don't know when you're going to be able to eat. So, if you don't have any other way of starting a fire except for a bow drill, then you don't want to exert too much energy in doing so. So I like a nice long bow. Make sure that it's strong and light. It helps if it's light. In fact, this one is made out of willow. And the reason why I chose willow is because even though this is an inch diameter, it is very strong because of the thickness, but it's also very light. Now, as long as you take care of that and you find a stick that will work for that, you're good to go there. But let's talk about the cordage. What if you don't have 550 like I have here? What if you don't have that and you need a string for the bow drill, right? Well, you have several different options. The first option is find cordage. There's several different plants that you can use to make cordage out of. In fact, in an upcoming video, I'm going to display how I process yucca leaf and turn it into cordage. And I'll even showcase on how I actually attach it to the bow. Because 550 you can tie knots and stuff, and maybe you can't with cordage. You can with the yucca, but maybe you can't because of the different cordage that you use. There's a different method on how to attach it to the bow. Now, if you don't have anything around it you can make cordage out of, that's fine. If you have a sweatshirt, you've got a string here, you can use that for a string for your bow. If you don't have this, maybe shoelaces. If you're wearing boots and you don't have shoelaces, then the lower hem of your t-shirt. You know, most people have a t-shirt on, and the lower hem of that, you can use that for cordage to make a bowstring. So those are just a few options that you can, utilize to get a bowstring. So that pretty much covers it with the bow. Now the next up, I want to talk about the socket. Now I don't have a socket on me right now, but a socket really is, I mean, it's important, but it really doesn't matter what you use. Any piece of wood, preferably a freshly cut green wood of any species, it doesn't matter. And just make sure that it fits nice in the hand, and then cut it in half so that it's flat, so that you can actually utilize it as a socket. But even then, as you see on the tip of this spindle right here, the friction still occurs and it causes heat. So you need something to reduce the friction. Now, some people use wax, some people use bear fat, some people use, greenery, and I particularly use a yucca leaf. It's an evergreen, it grows all year round, and it's plentiful in my part. But in other parts, there are evergreens such as spruce, pine, that you can utilize in the same manner. But anything that you can use to reduce friction, you're going to have to use, because you'll get halfway through almost getting an ember going and it'll start sticking because you've got both sides burning. and it'll make it very difficult for you to be successful. But I'll cover that later on when I go through the tips and tricks of that. So now we're getting to the spindle. Now there is a lot to talk about with a spindle, because number one, what type of material you're wanting to use. Now, in my case, what I have found is that it's actually better to use a softer wood for the spindle than for the hearthboard. Now, I use willow. I really love willow spindles. But for the hearthboard, I choose cottonwood. Now, they're both in the same family. In fact, the cottonwood is a part of the willow family, and they're both technically hardwoods. However, the willow, the weeping willow right here behind me, is a softer wood. And the reason why that it's best to get a softer wood is because most of your dust that builds up to the heat point comes from your spindle. So if you have a softer spindle, you'll be able to create more dust faster and therefore create an ember easier. So that covers that, but let's talk about the length. Now, me personally, I have two spindles. I have one here and one here. This one right here is much longer than this one. They both work just fine. And this one started off this length. Now, I know that I've seen people, they demonstrate that you do that right there and that's where it's at, and that's fine. That's fine. If it works for you, it's great. But for me, it really depends on how many uses you want to get out of the spindle, you know? And because every single time that you create one, you've got to, or getting ready to create a new one, you have to cut off some, flatten this back down, sharpen this back up, and you're losing material, therefore you're losing length. So I always start longer, that way I have more uses as I go. Now, let's talk about the thickness. And the thickness does matter. You want to have no more than the thickness of your thumb and no less than the thickness of your pinky. And the reason why is because if it's thicker than your thumb, then that means that it's going to take more rotations to build up the same friction. Okay? So that means that you're going to have to work harder. Well, in a survival situation, you're wanting to save on energy. So every chance that you get, you want to save on the energy. You don't want to put yourself out trying to get a fire going. So that's the reason why that you don't want to go thicker than that. Now, you don't want to go thinner than the pinky, and the reason for that is because if it's too thin, it will burn right through the hearthboard and you won't get an ember going at all. It'll just trash the hearthboard completely. So that's the reason for that. And that pretty much covers the spindle. I mentioned that I choose willow, but I will mention that you can use other materials. You can use cedar. It's much harder, but you can use it. You can use pine. Much harder, but you can use it. You can use cottonwood. Cottonwood set, it works great. Full willow set works great. But I just prefer willow. You can use poplar. You can use any of the willow family. Aspen, you can use any of the willow family. So that pretty much covers it for the spindle. And now let me go ahead and find a cottonwood tree and we'll set up and I'll show you what it looks like. And that, like I said before, that's what I use for the hearthboard. Alright, and now we're back with the eastern cottonwood. This is what the tree looks like. Has big, thick bark. Now, like I said before, it's technically a hardwood, but it is a softer of the hardwoods. Poplar is too. Aspen is too. All of the willow family is, even though they're hardwood, they are softer than what I would consider hardwood, like cherry or walnut or beech. So they are relatively soft as far as that goes. But this is what I like to get the hearth board from. As you see, I've made plenty of friction fires with it. In fact, 5. 2 from this hole. I made one, then my nephew made one, and then 1, 2, 3. So that's 5 out of this one hearth board. So let's talk about dimensions on the hearth board, because we covered the dimensions on the spindle. So let's talk about dimensions on the hearth board. So let's talk about the width. The width, I would go with 1 foot, no less than 1 foot. And the reason why is because, you know, I want plenty of room to put my foot, you know. And the other reason why is, how many uses are you wanting out of it? You know, again, it comes down to how many uses do you want out of it. You went out, you took all this time to find a perfect, you know, material to make yourself a bow drill set. You don't want to just use it once and then throw it away. So that's the reason why that I choose to go longer. For the thickness, this one is a 1/2 inch, which I prefer 5/8 to 3/4. But you wouldn't want to go any higher than that. You wouldn't want to go to 1 inch or, you know, anything more than, you know, 3/4 and 7/8 inch, whatever. And the reason why is because, like I mentioned before, it takes us, you know, the dust has to get up to the heat point before the ember can be created. So if it's really thick, then it's going to take longer to get up to the heat point, which is more work for you. So if you take it down to 5/8 to 3/4, and like I said, this is a 1/2 and it works fine, but I'm only getting like 1 or 2 per hole, and you might actually get 3, you know, out of something that is 5/8 and 3/4. And 2, like I said before about the spindle being a soft wood, it will build up faster, and you won't be exerting that much energy trying to get the dust up. So that's the reason why that I do what I do. Okay, so we've covered the 4 parts, and so the next step is actually gearing up and creating a fire with the bow drill, and we'll go over in detail different tips and tricks in order for you to be successful. Alright, now we're back to the tips and tricks on how to start a friction fire with using the bow drill. So, the first things first, I'm going to use the thicker one, get the newer one. You need to take the edge here, and you need to get down to the wood. You need the tip of it flat. You need to make sure that this right here is coming down to a point. You don't want a sharp point, but you do want enough, because as you do that with the socket, it will start burning down and making this rounder, and you want plenty of opportunity to get the fire going before it flattens off and then makes it difficult on you. Alright, the hearth board, you need to make a socket for it as well, and of course you're going to have to burn it in. After you burn it in and notch it in, and there's plenty of videos on how to do that. Then on the socket, you want to make sure that it's big enough of a socket so that you don't start off with friction, and then get you something like a yucca leaf or spruce needles or something like that to reduce the friction. And a fidget spinner is about the best thing I've seen. I don't have one. I never got into that phase. But anyway, you also need to make sure that you have a bird's nest ready so that when you get an ember, you have something to catch it. So, all right, I'm gonna get down and start doing it here. Now here's the thing. You need a piece of bark in order to be able to catch your ember. And you need to get it so that you're right on top of it. That way you can hold it straight wherever you are. You can hold it straight. You're not out of whack. You're comfortable, because it's going to take a little bit for the dust to build up. And that's what you want in the first part of it. You want the dust build up. So, get that ready. Get this ready. Put it right over. Make sure that your spindle is right up inside of that socket that you made. And you're ready to start. Now to start with, it's nice and slow, because all you're doing is building up dust. One gear, because you're not going to get anything until the friction, or I'm sorry, the dust builds up to the heat point. And you don't have to work too hard on that, because it's going to cause friction. It's going to build up the dust. And once you get the dust, then you can kind of go into gear 2. And that's all it takes. You got an ember, and you're not completely worn out. Now, the bow can go on the ground, and the socket can go on the ground. But this needs to stay dry. So I normally put it in the back pocket, because, well, I'm supposed to be dry, right? All right. Use the socket to kind of tap off and let that ember build. Give it a chance to build up, because you don't need to be in any hurry after you get that going. You want it nice and big when you put it into your bird's nest. Now, I'm going to set my hearth board on top of my socket there. I'm going to get my bird's nest, and it's built up pretty good there. Get closer to the camera. I don't know if you can see, but drop it right on into your bird's nest. Alright, I got some of this stuff too. catches quick. Gotta build it up. Gotta have plenty of air in there. Need three things. Gotta have heat, gotta have air, gotta have fuel. We've got all of it. Alright. Once that catches, I'll add my twigs onto it and I'll have me a nice fire going. But that's the tips and tricks on how to be successful in a bow drill. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you enjoyed the video. And if you did enjoy the video, hit the like button. If you're new, please subscribe. Leave a comment if you would. Tell me what you think, tell me what you want to see. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. Make sure you don't miss out on any new videos. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you soon.